Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. So find a comfortable spot, adjust your volume, take a nice deep breath in, let it out slowly, and off we go. Before we begin, I'd like to share a resource that many of us, including me, may find a great help, especially now when things are a little weird. BetterHelp.com provides secure online counseling to help with all that mental and emotional stuff that's mucking up our lives, anxiety, stress, and everything else keeping us awake. BetterHelp matches you with one of more than 4,000 licensed professional therapists. Your counselor works with you the way you like best, text, phone, or video, all from your own home. You don't need to put on a mask or fight for an appointment time. You can just get started right now. If you'd like to join more than 500,000 people taking charge of their mental health, visit trybetterhelp.com/boringbooks and get 10% off your first month. That's trybetterhelp.com/boringbooks or follow the link in the show description. Now, let's get to the reading. Tonight we're relaxing with a look into the oldest known cookbook in the Western world, Cookery and Dining in Imperial Rome by Apicius, a bibliography, critical review, and translation of the ancient book known as Apicius de Re Coquinaria, now for the first time rendered into English by Joseph Domers Velling, with a dictionary of technical terms, many notes, facsimiles of originals, and views and sketches of ancient culinary objects made by the author. Let's begin. The Book of Apicius, a study of its times, its authors and their sources, its authenticity, and its practical usefulness in modern times. Anyone who would know something worthwhile about the private and public lives of the ancients should be well acquainted with their table. Then, as now, the oft-quoted maxim stands that man is what he eats. Much of the ancient life is still shrouded and will forever be hidden by envious forces that have covered up bygone glory and grandeur, ground into mealy dust under the hooves of barbarian armies, remodeled, reused 100 times, discarded as of no value by clumsy hands. The crime of ignorance is a factor in league with the forces of destruction. Much is destroyed by blind strokes of fate, fate eternally pounding this earth in its everlasting, enigmatic efforts to shape life into something, the purpose of which we do not understand, the meaning of which we may not even venture to dream of or hope to know. Whatever there has been preserved by providence, by freaks of chance, by virtue of its own inherent strength, whatever has been buried by misers, fondled, treasured by loving hands of collectors and connoisseurs during all these centuries, every speck of ancient dust, every scrap of parchment or papyrus, a corroded piece of metal, a broken piece of stone or glass, so eagerly sought by the archaeologists and historians of the last few generations. All these fragmentary messages from out of the past emphasize the greatness of their time. They show its modernity, its nearness to our own days. They are now hazy reminiscences, as it were, by a middle-aged man of the hopes and the joys of his own youth. These furtive fragments, whatever they are, now tell us a story so full and so rich. They yield so marvelous a power, no man laying claim to possessing any intelligence may pass them without intensely feeling the eternal pathetic appeal to our hearts of these bygone ages that hold us down in an envious manner, begrudging us the warm lifeblood of the present, weaving invisible ties around us to make our hearts heavy. However, we are not here to be impeded by any sentimental considerations. Thinking of the past, we are not so much concerned with the picture that dead men have placed in our path, like ever so many billboards and posters. We do not care for their ideals, expounded in contemporary histories and eulogies. We are hardly moved by the facts, such as they would have loved to see them happen, nor do we cherish the figments of their human, very human subconsciousness. To gain a correct picture of the Roman table, we will therefore set aside for a while the fragments culled from ancient literature and history that have been misused so indiscriminately and so profusely during the last 2,000 years for various reasons. They have become fixed ideas, making reconstruction difficult for anyone who would gain a picture along rational lines. Barring two exceptions, there is no trustworthy, detailed description of the ancient table by an objective contemporary observer. To be sure, there are some sporadic efforts, mere reiterations. The majority of the ancient word pictures are distorted views on our subject by partisan writers, contemporary moralists on the one side, satirists on the other. Neither of them, we venture to say, knew the subject professionally. They were not specialists in the sense of modern writers like Renier, Rumor, and Verst, nor did they approach in technical knowledge medieval writers like Martino, Platina, and Torinus. True, there were exceptions. Athenaeus, a most prolific and voluble magiric commentator, quoting many writers and specialists whose names, but for him, would never have reached posterity. Athenaeus tells about these gastronomers, the greatest of them, Archestratos, men who might have contributed so much to our knowledge of the ancient world. But to us these names remain silent, for the works of these men have perished with the rest of the great library at the disposal of this genial host of Alexandria. Too, there are Anacharsis and Petronius. They and Athenaeus cannot be overlooked. These three form the bulk of our evidence. Take, on the other hand, Plutarch, Seneca, Tertullian, even Pliny, writers who have chiefly contributed to our defective knowledge of the ancient table. They were no gourmets. They were biased, unreliable at best as regards culinary matters. They deserve our attention merely because they are above the ever-present mob of antique reformers and politicians, of whom there was legion in Rome alone under the pagan regime. Their state of mind and their intolerance towards civilized dining did not improve with the advent of Christianity. The moralist's testimony is substantiated and supplemented rather than refuted by their very antipodes, the satirists, a group headed by Martial, Juvenal, and the incomparable Petronius, who really is in a class by himself. There is one more man worthy of mention in our particular study. Horace, a true poet, the most objective of all writers, man about town, pet of society, mundane genius, gifted to look calmly into the innermost heart of his time. His eyes fastened a correct picture on the sensitive diaphragm of a good memory, leaving an impression neither distorted nor out of focus. His eye did not pick up, for sundry reasons, the defects of the objects of observation, nor did it work with the uncanny joy of subconscious exaggeration met with so frequently in modern writing, nor did he indulge in that predilection for ugly detail sported by modern art. So much for Horatius, poet. Still, he was not a specialist in our line. We cannot enroll him among the gifted gourmets, no matter how many meals he enjoyed at the houses of his society friends. We are rather inclined to place him among the host of writers, ancient and modern, who have treated the subject of food with a sort of sovereign contempt, or at least with indifference, because its study presented unsurmountable difficulties, and the subject per se was a menial one. With this attitude of our potential chief witnesses defined, we have no occasion to further appeal to them here, and we might proceed to real business, to the sifting of the trustworthy material at hand. It is really a relief to know that we have no array of formidable authorities to be considered in our study. We have virgin field before us, i.e., the ruins of ancient greatness, grown over by a jungle of 2,000 years of hostile posterity. Pompeii. Pompeii was destroyed in AD 79. From its ruins we have obtained in the last half-century more information about the intimate, domestic, and public life of the ancients than from any other single source. What is more important, this vast wealth of information is first-hand, unspoiled, undiluted, unbiased, uncensored, in short, untouched by meddlesome human hands. Though only a provincial town, Pompeii was a prosperous mercantile place, a representative marketplace, a favorite resort for fashionable people. The town had hardly recuperated from a preliminary attack by that treacherous mountain Vesuvius, when a second onslaught succeeded in complete destruction. Suddenly, without warning, this lumbering force majeure visited the ill-fated towns in its vicinity with merciless annihilation. The population, just then enjoying the games in the amphitheater outside of the downtown district, had had hardly time to save their belongings. They escaped with their bare lives, only the aged, the infirm, the prisoners, and some faithful dogs were left behind. Today, their bodies in plaster casts may be seen, mute witnesses to a frightful disaster. The town was covered with an airtight blanket of ashes, lava, and fine pumice stone. There was no prolonged death struggle, no perceivable decay extended over centuries, as was the cruel lot of Pompeii's mistress, Rome. There were no agonies to speak of. The great event was consummated within a few hours. The peace of death settled down to reign supreme after the dust had been driven away by the gentle breezes coming in from the Bay of Naples. Some courageous citizens returned, searching in the hot ashes for the crashed-in roofs of their villas to recover this or that. Perhaps they hoped to salvage the strong box in the atrium or an heirloom from the triclinium, but soon they gave up. Despairing or hoping for better days to come, they vanished in the mist of time. Pompeii the fair, the hospitable, the gay city, just like any individual out of luck, was and stayed forgotten. The Pompeians, their joys, sorrows, their work and play, their virtues and vices, everything was arrested with one single stroke, stopped even as a camera clicks, taking a snapshot. The city's destruction, it appears, was a formidable opening blow dealt the Roman Empire in the prime of its life, in a war of extermination waged by hostile invisible forces. Pompeii makes one believe in providence. A great disaster actually molding, casting a perfect image of the time for future generations. To be exact, it took these generations 18 centuries to discover and to appreciate the heritage that was theirs, buried at the foot of Vesuvius. During these long, dark, and dusky centuries, charming goatherds had arrested unctuous shocks of hair upon mysterious columns that, like young giant asparagus, stuck their magnificent heads out of the ground. Blinking drowsily at yonder villainous mountain, the summit of which is eternally crowned with a halo of thin white smoke, such as we are accustomed to see arising from the stacks of chemical factories, the confident shepherd would lazily implore his patron saint to enjoin that unreliable devilish force within, lest the dolce far niente of the afternoon be disturbed, for siestas are among the most important functions in the life of that region. Occasionally, the more enterprising would arm themselves with pickaxe and shovel, made bold by whispered stories of fabulous wealth, and defying the evil spirits protecting it, they would set out on an expedition of loot and desecration of the tomb of ancient splendor. Only about a century and a half ago, the archaeological conscience awoke. Only 75 years ago, energetic moves made possible a fruitful pilgrimage to this shrine of humanity, while today not more than 2/3, but perhaps the most important parts of the city, have been opened to our astonished eyes by men who know. And now we may see that loaf of bread baked 19 centuries ago as found in the bake shop. We may inspect the ingenious bake oven where it was baked. We may see the mills that ground the flour for the bread, and indeed find unground wheat kernels. We see the oil still preserved in the jugs, the residue of wine still in the amphorae, the figs preserved in jars, the lentils, the barley, the spices in the cupboard. Everything awaits our pleasure. The taverns with their bars, the ancient guest's opinion of mine host scribbled on the wall, the kitchens with their implements, the boudoirs of milady with the cosmetics and perfumes in the compacts. There are the advertisements on the walls, the foods praised with all the éclat of modern advertising, the election notices, the love missives, the bank deposits, the theater tickets, law records, bills of sale. Phantom-like yet real, there are the good citizens of a good town, parading, hustling, loafing, sturdy patricians, wretched plebeians, stern centurios, boastful soldiers, scheming politicians, crafty law clerks, timid scribes, chattering barbers, bullying gladiators, haughty actors, dusty travelers, making for Albinuses, the famous host at the Via della Abbondanza. Or would he give preference to Serenus, the son of Publius, who advertised so cleverly? Or perhaps could he afford to stop at the Fortunata Hotel, centrally located? There are, too, the boorish hayseeds from out of town trying to sell their produce. Unaccustomed to the fashionable Latin-Greek speech of the city folks, gaping with their mouths wide open, greedily at the steaks of sacrificial meat displayed behind enlarging glasses in the cheap cookshop windows. There they giggle and chuckle, those wily landlords with their blasé habitués and their underlings, the greasy cooks, the roguish good mixers at the bar, and the winsome if resolute cope, waitresses, all ready to go to do business. So slippery are the cooks that Plautus called one congrio, sea eel, so black that another deserves the title anthrax, coal. There they are, one and all, the characters necessary to make up what we call civilization, chattering agitatedly in a lingo of Latin Greek oscan, as if life were a continuous market day. It takes no particular scholarship, only a little imagination and human sympathy to see and to hear the ghosts of Pompeii. There is no pose about this town, no mise en scène, no stage setting, no heroic gesture, no theatricals. In short, no lies. There is to be found no shred of that vainglorious cloak which humans will deftly drape about their shoulders whenever they happen to be aware of the camera. There is no registering of any kind here. Pompey's natural and pleasant disposition, therefore, is ever so much more in evidence. Not a single one of this charming city's movements was intended for posterity. Her life stands before our eyes in clear reality, in naked, unadorned truth. There were many things that the good folks would have loved to point to with pride. You have to search for these now. There are, alas and alack, a few things they would have hidden had they only known what was in store for them. But all these things, good, indifferent, and bad, remained in their places, and here they are unsuspecting, real, natural, charming like Diana and her wood nymphs. Were it not quite superfluous, we would urgently recommend the study of Pompeii to the students of life in general, and to those of antiquity in particular. Those who would know something about the ancient table cannot do without Pompeii. 3 ancient writers, Anacharsis, Apicius, Petronius. To those who lay stress upon documentary evidence or literary testimony, to those trusting implicitly in the honesty and reliability of writers of fiction, we would recommend Petronius Arbiter. His Cena Trimalchionis, Trimalchio's Dinner, is the sole surviving piece from the pen of a Roman contemporary, giving detailed information on our subject. It is, too, the work of a great writer moving in the best circles, and therefore so much more desirable as an expert. Petronius deserves to be quoted in full, but his work is too well known and our space too short. However, right here we wish to warn the student to bear in mind in perusing Petronius that this writer in his Cena is not depicting a meal, but that he is satirizing a man. That makes all the difference in the world as far as we are concerned. Petronius's Cena is plainly an exaggeration, but even from its distorted contours, the student may recognize the true lines of an ancient meal. There is, not so well known, a beautiful picture of an Athenian dinner party which must not be overlooked, for it contains a wealth of information. Although Greek, we learn from it much of the Roman conditions. Anacharsis' description of a banquet at Athens, dating back to the 4th century BC, about the time when the Periclean regime flourished, is worth your perusal. A particularly good version of this tale is rendered by Baron Verst in his book Gastrosophy, written in Leipzig in 1854, who has based his version on the original translation from the Greek. Verst has amplified the excerpts from the young traveler's observations by quotations from other ancient Greek writers upon the subject, thus giving us a most beautiful and authentic ideal description of Greek table manners and habits when Athens had reached the height in culture, refinement, and political greatness. Anacharsis was not a Hellene, but a Scythian visitor. By his own admission, he is no authority on Grecian cookery, but as a reporter he excels. This truly Hellenic discussion of the art of eating and living at the table of the cultured Athenians is the most profound discourse we know of, ancient or modern, on eating. The wisdom revealed in his tale is lasting, and like Greek marble, consummate in external beauty and inner worth. We thus possess the testimony of 2 contemporary writers, which together with the book of Apicius, and with what we learn from Athenaeus, should give a fair picture of ancient eating and cookery. Apicius is our most substantial witness. Unfortunately, this source has not been spared by meddlesome men, and it has not reached us in its pristine condition. As a matter of fact, Apicius has been badly mauled throughout the centuries. This book has always attracted attention. Never has it met with indifference. In the Middle Ages, it became the object of intensive study, interpretation, and controversy. In short, it has attracted interest that has lasted into modern times. When, with the advent of the Dark Ages, it ceased to be a practical cookery book, it became a treasure cherished by the few who preserved the classical literature, and after the invention of printing, it became the object of curiosity, even mystery. Some interpreters waxed enthusiastic over it. Others who failed to understand it condemned it as hopeless and worthless. The authenticity of Apicius. Age-old mysteries surrounding our book have not yet been cleared up. Medieval savants have squabbled in vain. Mrs. Pennell's worries and the fears of the learned Englishmen that Apicius might be a hoax have proven groundless. Still, the mystery of this remarkable book is as perplexing as ever. The authorship will perhaps never be established, but let us forever dispel any doubt about its authenticity. Modern writers have never doubted the genuineness. To name but a few who believe in Apicius: Thudicum, Volmer, Brandt, Vicar, Rumer, Skook, Hobbes, and Golmer. What matters the identity of the author? Who wrote the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Nibelungenlied? Let us be thankful for possessing them. Apicius is a genuine document of Roman imperial days. There can be no doubt of it. The unquestionable age of the earliest known manuscripts alone suffices to prove this. The philologist gives his testimony too. A medieval scholar could never have manufactured Apicius, imitating his striking original terminology. Faking a technical treatise requires an intimate knowledge of technical terms and familiarity with the ramifications of an intricate trade. We recommend a comparison of Platina's text with Apicius. The difference of ancient and medieval Latin is convincing. Striking examples of this kind have been especially noted in our Dictionary of Technical Terms. Obscure terminology. Apicius contains technical terms that have been the subject of much speculation and discussion. Liquamen, lacer, muria, garum, etc. belong to these. They will be found in our little dictionary, but we cannot refrain from discussing some at present to make intelligible the most essential part of the ancient text. Take liquamen, for instance. It may stand for broth, sauce, stock, gravy, drippings, even for court bouillon. In fact, for any liquid appertaining to or derived from a certain dish or food material. Now, if Apicius prescribes liquamen for the preparation of a meat or a vegetable, it is by no means clear to the uninitiated what he has in mind. In fact, in each case the term liquamen is subject to the interpretation of the experienced practitioner. Others than he would at once be confronted with an insurmountable difficulty. Scientists may not agree with us, but such is kitchen practice. Hence the many fruitless controversies at the expense of the original, at the disappointment of science. Garum is another word, one upon which much contemptuous witticism and serious energy has been spent. Garum simply is a generic name for fish essences. True, garus is a certain and a distinct kind of Mediterranean fish, originally used in the manufacture of garum, but this product in the course of time has been altered, modified, adulterated, in short, has been changed, and the term has naturally been applied to all varieties and variations of fish essences, without distinction, and it has thus become a collective term covering all varieties of fish sauces. Indeed, the corruption and degeneration of this term garum had so advanced at the time of Vinidarius in the 5th century as to lose even its association with any kind of fish. Terms like garrotum, prepared with garum, have been derived from it. Prepared with the addition of wine, it becomes enogarum, wine sauce, and dishes prepared with such wine sauce receive the adjective of enogarotum, and so forth. The original garum was no doubt akin to our modern anchovy sauce, at least the best quality of the ancient sauce. The principles of manufacture surely are alike. Garum, like our anchovy sauce, is the puree of a small fish named garus, as yet unidentified. The fish, intestines and all, was spiced, pounded, fermented, salted, strained, and bottled for future use. The finest garum was made of the livers of the fish only, exposed to the sun, fermented and somehow preserved. It was an expensive article in old Rome, famed for its medicinal properties. Its mode of manufacture has given rise to much criticism and scorn on the part of medieval and modern commentators and interpreters, who could not comprehend the perverse taste of the ancients in placing any value on the essence from putrefied intestines of fish. However, garum has been vindicated, confirmed, endorsed, reiterated, and rediscovered, if you please, by modern science. What, pray, is the difference in principle between garum, the exact nature of which is unknown, and the oil of the liver of cod or less expensive fish, exposed to the beneficial rays of ultraviolet light, artificial sunlight, to imbue the oil with an extra large and uniform dose of vitamin D? The ancients, it appears, knew vitamin D to exist. Maybe they had a different name for vitamins, maybe none at all. The name does not matter. The thing which they knew does. They knew the nutritive value of liver, proven by many formulae. Some modern preparations are astonishingly ancient and vice versa. Our anchovy sauce is used freely to season fish, to mix with butter, to be made into solid anchovy or fish paste. There are sardine pastes, lobster pastes, fish forcemeats found in the larder of every good kitchen, preparations of Apician character. A real platter of hors d'oeuvres, an antipasto, is not complete unless made according to certain Apician precepts. We moderns are just as extravagant, if not more, in the use of sauces and condiments, Apician sauces too. Our Worcestershire, ketchup, chili, chutney, walnut ketchup, A1, Harvey's, Punch, Sawyer's, Escoffier's, Oscar's. Every culinary coryphée endeavors to create one. Our mustards and condiments in their different forms, if not actually dating back to Apicius, are at least lineal descendants from ancient prototypes. The recipes of Apicius and the excerpts from Apicius by Vinidarius. Original translation from the texts of Turinus, Hummelbergius, Lister, and Giratano Volmer, with notes and comments. The 10 Books of Apicius. 1. The Careful Experienced Cook. 2. Minces. 3. The Gardener. 4. Miscellaneous dishes. 5. Legumes. 6. Poultry. 7. Fancy dishes. 8. Quadrupeds. 9. Seafood. 10. Fish sauces. Note: the Greek titles of the 10 books point to a common Greek origin, indicating that Apicius is a collection of Greek monographs on various branches of cookery, specialization such as highly developed civilizations would produce. Both the literary style and the contents of the books point to different authors, as may be seen from the very repetitions of and similarities in subjects as in 6 and 8, and in 9 and 10. The absence of books on bread and cake baking, dessert cookery, indicates that the present Apicius is not complete. Book 1. The Careful Experienced Cook. Fine spiced wine, or conditum paradoxum. The composition of this excellent spice wine is as follows. Into a copper bowl put 6 sextari of honey and 2 sextari of wine. Heat on a slow fire, constantly stirring the mixture with a whip. At the boiling point, add a dash of cold wine. Retire from stove and skim. Repeat this twice or 3 times. Let it rest till the next day and skim again. Then add 4 ounces of crushed pepper, 3 scruples of mastic, a dram each of nard or laurel leaves and saffron, 5 drams of roasted date stones, crushed and previously soaked in wine to soften them. When this is properly done, add 18 sextari of light wine. To clarify it perfectly, add crushed charcoal, twice or as often as necessary, which will draw the residue together, and carefully strain or filter through the charcoal. Honey refresher for travelers. Conditum melizomum viatorium. The wayfarer's honey refresher, so called because it gives endurance and strength to pedestrians, with which travelers are refreshed by the wayside, is made in this manner. Flavor honey with ground pepper and skim. In the moment of serving, put honey in a cup, as much as is desired to obtain the right degree of sweetness, and mix spiced wine not more than a needed quantity. Also add some wine to the spiced honey to facilitate its flow and the mixing. Roman vermouth, or Absinthium Romanum. Roman vermouth or absinthe is made thus. According to the recipe of Camerinum, you need wormwood from Santo for Roman vermouth, or, as a substitute, wormwood from the Pontus, cleaned and crushed, 1 Theban ounce of it, 6 scruples of mastic, 3 each of nard leaves, costmary and saffron, and 18 quarts of any kind of mild wine. Charcoal is not required because of the bitterness. Rose wine, rosatum. Make rose wine in this manner. Rose petals, the lower white part removed, sewed into a linen bag and immersed in wine for 7 days. Thereupon add a sack of new petals, which allow to draw for another 7 days. Again remove the old petals and replace them by fresh ones for another week. Then strain the wine through the colander. Before serving, add honey sweetening to taste. Take care that only the best petals, free from dew, be used for soaking. Violet wine, Violatium. In a similar way as above, like the rose wine, violet wine is made of fresh violets and tempered with honey as directed. Used principally as a laxative medicine, these wines compounded of roses and violets move the bowels strongly. Rose wine without roses, rosatum sine rosa. Rose wine without roses is made in this fashion. A palm leaf basket full of fresh citrus leaves is immersed in the vat of new wine before fermentation has set in. After 40 days, retire the leaves, and as occasion arises, sweeten the wine with honey and pass it up for rose wine. Liburnian oil, Oleum liburnicum. In order to make an oil similar to the Liburnian oil, proceed as follows. In Spanish oil, put the following mixture of elecampane, Cyprian rush, and green laurel leaves that are not too old, all of it crushed and macerated and reduced to a fine powder. Sift this in and add finely ground salt, and stir industriously for 3 days or more. Then allow to settle. Everybody will take this for Liburnian oil. To clarify muddy wine, vinum ex atro candidum facies. Put bean meal and the whites of 3 eggs in a mixing bowl. Mix thoroughly with a whip and add to the wine, stirring for a long time. The next day the wine will be clear. Ashes of vines have the same effect. To improve a broth, de liquamen emendando. If broth has contracted a bad odor, place a vessel upside down and fumigate it with laurel and cypress, and before ventilating it, pour the broth in this vessel. If this does not help matters, and if the taste is too pronounced, add honey and fresh spikenard. That will improve it. Also, new must should be likewise effective. To keep meats fresh without salt for any length of time, ut carnes sine sale quovis tempore recente sint. Cover fresh meat with honey, suspend it in a vessel. Use as needed. In winter it will keep, but in summer it will last only a few days. Cooked meat may be treated likewise. Salts for many ills. Sales conditos ad multa. These spiced salts are used against indigestion, to move the bowels, against all illness, against pestilence, as well as for the prevention of colds. They are very gentle indeed, and more healthful than you would expect. Make them in this manner: 1 pound of common salt ground, 2 pounds of ammoniac salt ground, 3 ounces white pepper, 2 ounces ginger, 1 ounce of Amanian bryony, 1 of thyme seed, and 1 of celery seed. If you don't want to use celery seed, take instead 3 ounces of parsley seed, 3 ounces of oregano, 1 ounce of saffron, 3 ounces of black pepper, 1 1/2 ounces of rocket seed, 2 ounces of marjoram, 2 ounces of nard leaves, 2 ounces of parsley seed, and 2 ounces of anise seed. Oxygarum, an aid to digestion. Oxygarum digestibile. Oxygarum, which is similar to garum, or rather an acid sauce, is digestible and is composed of 1/2 ounce of pepper, 3 scruples of Gallic silphium, 6 scruples of cardamom, 6 of cumin, 1 scruple of leaves, 6 scruples of dry mint. These ingredients are broken singly and crushed and made into a paste, bound by honey. When this work is done, or whenever you desire, add broth and vinegar to taste. Cuttlefish croquettes. Istitia de loligine. The meat is separated from bones, skin, and refuse, chopped fine and pounded in the mortar. Shape the forcemeat into neat croquettes and cook them in liquamen. They are displayed nicely in a large dish. Brain sausage. Istitia de cerebellis. Put in the mortar pepper, lovage, and oregano. Moisten with broth and rub. Add cooked brains and mix diligently so that there be no lumps. Incorporate 5 eggs and continue mixing well to have a good forcemeat, which you may thin with broth. Spread this out in a metal pan, cook, and when cooked and cold, unmold it onto a clean table. Cut into a handy size. Now prepare a sauce. Put in the mortar pepper, lovage, and oregano. Crush, mix with broth put into a saucepan. Boil, thicken, and strain. Heat the pieces of brain pudding in this sauce thoroughly. Dish them up, sprinkled with pepper, in a mushroom dish. Treatment of strong-smelling birds of every description. Ad aves hircosis omne genere. For birds of all kinds that have a goatish smell, pepper, lovage, thyme, dry mint, sage, dates, honey, vinegar, wine, broth, oil, reduced must, and mustard. the birds will be more luscious and nutritious, and the fat preserved, if you envelop them in a dough of flour and oil and bake them in an oven. For flamingo and parrot, in phonicoptero. Scald the flamingo, wash and dress it, put it in a pot, add water, salt, dill, and a little vinegar to be parboiled. Finish cooking with a bunch of leeks and coriander, and add some reduced must to give it color. In the mortar, crush pepper, cumin, coriander, laser root, mint, rue, moisten with vinegar, add dates and the fond of the braised bird, thicken, strain, and cover the bird with the sauce and serve. Parrot is prepared in the same manner. And with that, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Re Coquinaria by Apicius. I confess I skipped about a half of that introduction, and it still took 40 minutes to read. It's actually quite interesting, and you might want to check it out for yourself. As always, you'll find a link to a free ebook version from Project Gutenberg in the show description. The description also includes ways you can support this podcast, including one-time tipping via buymeacoffee.com or becoming a subscriber on Patreon, where you'll receive exclusive perks like monthly episodes found nowhere else. If you'd like to connect, send me a note via our website, www.boringbookspod.com, or catch me on Twitter at boringbookspod. I'd love to hear from you. I'm so glad you could join me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.